Oh, there she is.
Hey, sorry about that, everyone. Slight technical difficulty for our very first live event. I am so excited to kick off our very first conversation with Compassionate Equestrians with none other than a very, very dear friend, Yasmin Stuart. I'm not going to say any more about Yasmin because I want to listen to Yasmin's words and just sit back and enjoy what she has to say about herself. So, this is a very formal, obviously very live, very real, very raw event where we're literally going to chat about whatever comes up around the topic of compassionate equestrianism. So, Yasmin, why don't you kick off by introducing yourself and what does compassionate equestrianism mean to you?
Oh, goodness me. Well, I'd like to start by saying what an honour it is to be the first guest on Conversations with Compassionate Equestrians. I think these sorts of chats are probably my favourite kind of chat because it gets to sort of the bones as to why we all do this. And I know that everyone that I've met in the industry who resonates, we all have our sort of story behind it. We all have the thing that got us into the industry and got us sort of as passionate and kind of compassionate as we all are. So I guess, gosh, and you got going with a big one there about what does it mean to be compassionate. I think for me, when we're really kind of getting to the bones of it, it's compassion for me is really thinking about the why behind your action with whatever you choose. And I think from an equestrian perspective, we all have so many different things we can do, so many methodologies, so many sort of calls to action, or so many this is right or this is wrong, or all of these opinions. And I think the compassionate part for me is really understanding the why behind any choice that you make for your horse or for you with respect to your horse. And I think that's not born out of I have a horse and therefore I'm going to do XYZ with them. I think it's born out of really caring about your horse's lived experience within the world and really caring about what it is that you offer your horse as a human. And I think with respect to that, compassion um, also is kind of embodied by us being kind to ourselves in any given moment as well. Because I think when we're looking at our relationship with our horses and how that develops over time, I think it can be easy to get caught up in all of the ways in which we didn't do things how we do them now or how we do them in the future. And I think with that in mind, it's also kind of being compassionate to what you have to offer at any given moment and how that's also subject to change over time with new information or new resources or less resources. We're in a world where a lot of the time we can have an appropriate amount of abundance for our horse. And also sometimes we don't. Sometimes those resources aren't available to us. And so being compassionate about where you're at, what you have to offer, and also in many cases knowing that what you're doing is good enough. I think I've just waffled for like 5 minutes.
No,
But
it's beautiful. I think, it's a funny thing, compassion, isn't it? Because I think we're all going to have a very subjective experience on what that means for us. And maybe some people haven't even considered it really. Like, what is compassion like? What does that feel like? Unless you've really thought about it. And where does that fit in when I'm in relationship with my horse? And I think it's worthy of a really good long contemplation. And the why thing, like, why am I here with my horse? Why am I doing what I am doing? I think these are all really important questions: the whys, the whats, the hows. But I just don't think we kind of pause enough and have pauses to actually take stock and question and have this gentle self-inquiry about what are we doing and who seeks to benefit from it. It's another sort of W word, you know.
Yeah, and I've been reflecting on this a lot lately, because I also think we have the propensity to perhaps gaslight ourselves as well. So I think it's really important when we're looking at being compassionate. I meet a lot of people who feel a lot of shame actually about not being good enough. Case in point, I was at a clinic at the weekend, and the clinic was incredible, my goodness. But what I noticed was that there were a lot of apologetic people in the room. So when people were perhaps given guidance with what to do with their horse, that wasn't met with a, "Oh, I understand now." That was met with a, "Sorry." And I think, goodness me, what did we curate in the equestrian culture, where everyone is so damn apologetic and not actually, not feeling like they're showing up as their best self in a learning situation, but feeling like they need to apologize all the time. And so I think, yes, considering why we're doing things, absolutely. I mean, I know with the conversations that you and I have in the car about our own thoughts and feelings while we're driving to our various clients, um, but I also think it's thinking about what it is that you have to offer yourself and your horse, and then with that, not giving yourself a whole world of grief about it as well. This is where I am in this moment in time, and tomorrow that's subject to change, and I'm different from how I was yesterday. And that doesn't necessarily mean better either. It just means that we're all kind of flowing through this world where we're working out what we have to offer, what we have to bring to the table for our horses, or from my perspective, from my clients as well. I know that that is subject to kind of flux and change too, as I get new pieces of information, or I reflect on client feedback, or I reflect on my own internal dialogue, or what my peers and professionals around me have to say as well. So yeah, I think it's also not coming at things from the lens of, "Oh, that wasn't good enough," or, "Oh, I could have done that better," or, "Oh, this is what I have to offer right now," and, "Oh, my poor horse." Sometimes, this is just what we got. And, we got to sometimes make the best of that as well, I think.
Yeah, I think it's tough at the minute. I don't know about you, but just sort of scrolling through social media, there's so much shaming and blaming, and obviously bringing to attention practices that are not in the best interest of the horse's well-being is good, but it can feel overwhelming. Like, it's almost every other post is reminding me of something that I did in my past that wasn't compassionate. I see that now as a 48-year-old adult woman that had a long career in pony club and riding and teaching, and it's like, my goodness, there's no way I would have a relationship like that with a horse. And it's so easy to feel overwhelmed by your own shame, but you've got to, just like you said, try and foster self-compassion before all else, because if you're dragging that into your relationship where you constantly feel the need to apologetic, you're not actually being present, and you're not able to fully enjoy that moment in that time space reality to properly grow and evolve out of. So yeah, I think it's really tricky. There's actually, do you mind if I read out something that you wrote on Facebook recently?
No,
Because
go
it
for
kind of what you've just said. It's beautiful. So for anyone who doesn't know Yasmin, and we've yet to really find who Yasmin is and what she does, but for anyone who doesn't know, Yasmin's posts I find beautifully written and really from the heart, really inspirational. They're really positive, and I find it like a breath of fresh air when I read them, especially in, you know, what's kind of going on at the moment. So I'm just going to read out Yasmin's last post, proper post, where you've sort of written things about things that's going on in your life. So Yasmin wrote, "We are living in a world where we are all too aware of the horrors of existence, and that statement is not just limited to the equestrian world. I want to fuel the picture that we are privileged to live in this world, that we can cultivate harmony with ourselves and our horses. This doesn't come from focusing on the bad things. It comes from showing up each day and meeting ourselves and our horses precisely where we are at." And then you end with that beautiful quote, "Be the light you seek to find." And I think that kind of, for me, that's such a beautiful Yasmin sentence. You know, it's just like, you know, this is Yasmin's world. This is what it feels like, you know, to kind of keep showing up and acknowledge that we are privileged, that we don't really lack for anything, let's face it, do we? But we always find that there's something to complain about, there's something to moan about, there's something to apologize for, there's something to feel triggered about. And of course we're evolving creatures in this time-space reality, and we're at the very beginning of our journey. But I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about kind of what stirred you to say that, and yeah, how do you show up every day? What kind of practical advice might you give us mere mortals?
So I I say used to be because, you know, I've only felt like this for a couple of months, although a couple of months seems to be feeling all expansive and forever. It used to be that I'd get this little sort of nugget of inspiration, and then I could sort of capture that and I could run with it. Um, and that was great. My goodness, did I take that for granted? And recently social media really doesn't seem very social, if I'm being completely honest. I mean, I know we call it anti-social media because we're all on our phones all the time and ignoring the people around us. And, you know, I need to sort of apologize to my husband for that one. But every time I log on to my Facebook, all I am seeing is not only all of the bad practices in the industry and people who are, you know, admittedly doing heroic jobs in calling out the bad practices in the industry. But there are people, like, I'm looking at people getting at other people's throats on social media. And I also know, you know, in the past, I was a bit of a savage and I, you know, used to do that as well. And I'm like, kids, we're on the same team. Like, we're all on the same team. Why are we having a go at each other for different nuances in the expression of the classical masters, or our different perceptions of these, you know, classical masters, or different ways to just all of the thing. I mean, I haven't even got the words. It's just like, it feels like there are fewer and fewer friends happening in the industry, people who are sort of joining forces and actually collaborating for the joy of the horse rather than collaborating for the monetary gain or the social prowess or whatever. And so I found myself, you know, circling back to your question, those words came around because every time every time I found like a little nugget of inspiration, I'd start typing something. I normally type things on the notes on my phone, or more recently, what I've been doing is just kind of experimenting with writing it by hand. And for that, I find the flow has started to come a little bit easier, perhaps because I'm not caught up in the sort of perfectionist loop. But I started writing things and then I'd read them back and think, my goodness, like, who made you the queen of everything? Jeez. Um, and, and I looked at it and thought, oh, I don't even like me right now. I don't like what I've just written. I sound like, you know, those other folk on social media that are just telling you that you're doing it wrong. And the thing that I'm really working towards at the minute is just trying to empower people to make really good choices for their horse. And so what I find when I'm out and about and I'm thinking, and I know, again, you and I have these really cool discussions where we really sort of work around a subject area. So there's no definitives. And I think it really is what works for each individual person. And I can come at things and say, well, this is my viewpoint, and this is what I've been thinking of, and this is how I would go about it. But really wanting to empower people to find their own conviction, because I find so often we can outsource all of our horses management or all of our viewpoints to someone else, whether that is our instructor or our trimmer or our saddle fitter or our body worker, or the person on social media that said stuff that got approximately a gajillion likes, although I don't think the Facebook algorithm is doing anyone any favors right now. And so with that, that post came around because for the first time in a while, I managed to actually cobble together some words to put a finger on how I was feeling, which was, we're all really caught up in this negativity bias. No one is good enough. If you look on social media, no one is good enough. That is what the narrative says.
Yeah.
And it's really disempowering to go online and think, oh, goodness me, there's a picture of a horse. And I actually quite like that picture of the horse, but everyone is shredding the fact that, their nose is maybe a millimeter in front of the vertical rather than 2 millimeters in front of the vertical, or the foot landing is different, or the toes are still quite long, albeit the toes have come back a little bit, or the rider's not riding perfectly, or the rug is the wrong color. Like I don't know, we're all just so quick to criticize each other, and it just feels oppressive. If I'm honest, it feels oppressive. And everyone that I meet, they talk about how hard it's been. It's been a hard winter. Um, and
Yeah.
I've just been busy congratulating everyone on surviving, to be honest. And again, we come full circle to these apologetic people who are like, I'm sorry, I haven't done the exercises. And I'm like, sweetheart, you were in a swamp 2 weeks ago. Like, it's fine. I'm just pleased you're here and still alive and still trying to summon your horse,
Yeah.
So that's where that
No,
post
I
came to
get it.
be. And it was kind of like, rather than looking at things, I've been doing this in my life, and I realize I've gone off on this sort of monologue, but please allow it. With my life, I've been looking at really cutting that mindset that says things will be better when, how can we love the things that we've got right now? And how can we enjoy this process? Because everyone's wanting the next movement with their horse. Everyone's wanting, oh, when I can ride. And then when they're sat on their horse, they're like, oh, I really want a canter. And then they're like, but the canter, like the head and neck position isn't good enough. And I'm just here thinking, God, you know what? I just can't wait to have a horse so I can sit in the field and look at the horse and think, God, you are the most beautiful horse in existence, even though there are a million other horses who are the most beautiful horse in existence, I've got a friend who put they're not horsey, but they put some beautiful things online. Um, and they did this amazing quote, which I would definitely butcher, so I'm not going to repeat it. But they really talked about how the only important moment is this moment right now. And so that's kind of where I was going with that post, as much as, I didn't want to turn it
Yeah.
into a book. And I also know I'm the world's worst for
Please turn it
going
into a
too
book.
long, didn't read, you know. So just little snippets. And if people get to the end of it, congratulations. And if they don't, well, congratulations, because you're probably doing something better with your day,
Can I just say on behalf of your Facebook followers, please write a book. Please put it in a book. And then we can just pick it up and go, oh, what's my quote for the day? Oh, there we go, And what is it? What is it? Spiro ergo prospero. I breathe, then I prosper.
Oh,
So
I
we
like
can
that.
Yeah, we can bring it right down to the fact that we are simply a bunch of cells in like alive with a soul, with a purpose, whether we know it or not, with a purpose, and we're breathing. I mean, when you take it all back down to that level, what else is there? What else do you
Yeah.
want? We're alive,
Yeah.
we're breathing. Be grateful for that. And it kind of puts everything back into perspective when that perfect canter strike our forehead and neck position's not there, when we're apologizing for not knowing something, that we bash our heads because we think we ought to know it. It's just, we're always making mistakes. I mean, on that topic, I made a huge one at the weekend. I'm going to admit it to everybody. And if you follow me on Facebook, you might have seen it. So just allow me a moment to just sort of have a little sideways thing on this. And for me, it really highlighted my need to pause. And I am really trying to kind of pause and just mind those moments and let them connect together a little bit, just to be so present, so that when I turn up for the horses, I am more present. I am more connected both to me and myself, and therefore to everything that's going on around me. But, life gets crazy and we get caught up with whatever, and we see something on social media and we think, oh, I really like those pictures. Share, which is what I did the end of last week, because the person whose post it was, I really respect. And the pictures were really, really great pictures of excellent hoof care. And the words to the text were absolutely brilliant, really in alignment. And I shared it without thinking. And then I left it a few days. And then suddenly there was all these messages about, oh my goodness, why did you share that? That was horrific. That's the worst thing you've ever done. That makes you look really bad. And I was like, what did I do? I didn't see it. So I had a really good look at the post, and there was an acronym that I'm not going to repeat because it was very, very rude. And they wrote 4 words and then highlighted the words down the middle. Well, it was a very rude word. And I was like, oh, I didn't see it for ages. I mean, I was like, what is it about this post that people don't like, And it took me forever, because that's just how my brain works. And then I was like, oh, I'm really apologetic. I'm really sorry. That was because I did not pause before choosing to share something on my Facebook page that represents me as an individual and as a professional, and what I'm trying to do for my corner of the world. And yeah, I made a big mistake, and I'd like to think that I was given the benefit of the doubt, and I wasn't always. And that kind of triggered me a little bit. And I was like, oh, I feel a little judged. I'm being judged. Where does that come from within me? Because if I didn't feel judged, then I'm probably a perfect human being, aren't I? But I felt judged. So clearly there's some work to be done. And then you go back into that self-apologetic. Oh, why aren't I doing better? Why am I tricking? And it's like, it's ridiculous. It's too much. We need to just chill out and just go easy on ourselves. And life, it's supposed to be fun. And I think it's all got really serious. It's all got really nitpicky, and it's all got really, my way's better than your way. And and when horses are involved and we think it should be done a different way, and it's really hard. I mean, it's a really, really difficult industry to work in. I think it's probably one of the toughest, jobs that you can do. I mean, I was an RSPCA inspector many, many, many years ago. You're talking like 25 years ago. I remember going for my interviews still, but that was a tough job. And I think this is harder. People say that must have been a really hard job when you really care for animals. And I would say I probably care more for them now, or I'm allowing myself to love more openly as I get older. But yeah, I find it tough. I mean, how do you cope? How do you cope? What does Yasmin's day look like? Take us through it, and then maybe it'll give people an idea of who you are, what you do, and what is it like to be Yasmin Stuart? Talk us through it.
just before I go there, I think what's really interesting for me is all of the possibilities for things to go right. And I think as a practitioner in the industry, so as an equine physiotherapist, it can be very easy to turn up and look at all of the ways in which people are not doing things right or could be doing things better. And I think what's really interesting is that when you're looking at a horse human partnership, you're looking at two sentient beings. And I think there's this level of course, we're coming at things with our skill set and with our viewpoint, but we also don't have the lived experience of those two beings together as a partnership. And so I think the most challenging thing about being in this industry is looking at what is good enough and understanding what might be good enough or what might be an improvement for that horse and human partnership, but also kind of helping them to embody that themselves. Whereas, we can come at things with our scales and our metrics for success and our biomechanical viewpoint and our pain ethograms and things like that. But there's also this whole sentiment of the relationship that we also need to observe to really understand how that horse is doing and how that human are doing and how they're interacting together. And I think I obviously don't know what it's like to be an RSPCA officer, but I think you can come at things and see the obvious neglect and go, oh, okay, I have, cause to action with this, I can do a thing. Whereas within the horse human relationship, when you're a practitioner working in the industry, obviously there is a metric for neglect, but with what we both offer now, I think part and parcel of the pricing point that we both put ourselves at, and also the things that we put on social media, it's rare that we're exposed to that now. Very rare. Very occasionally I'll get a client that might be recommendation off of someone who's sort of very peripheral in my sort of area of expertise, and I step foot onto a yard and think, goodness me, I didn't realize that this happened anymore. But it still does, and it's a bit of a shock to the system. But outside of that, by and large, I'm just seeing people trying their best, and they're actually by and large doing really quite well with it. So I think that's what makes it hard, because we see all of the variables and all of the nuances and all of the things, and then we watch a webinar and we can integrate it, and our exposure is so much greater than that one person with their one horse. And so I think that's what makes it tricky, because it can be so easy for us to pull things out of context because of our experience, rather than recognizing it in the context for which it is, which is a horse and a human who are just trying their best. So yeah, I think for me, that's a really fascinating phenomena that I'm kind of muddling my way through when I'm driving around thinking, what about this variable and that variable and the other variable? But really, coming back to the question about who I am and what do I do in a day. So I'm an equine physiotherapist. I said earlier, I'm really looking at empowering people to make really, really good choices for their horses, which I think is fun, because the the avenues for that are never ending, no matter the resources. You can always help people to feel empowered to make good choices for their horse, or think about how to make good choices for their horse. I'm on the road approximately 3 days a week. I'm trying to work on my boundaries so that I'm not on the road longer than 3 days a week. Quite often I have my dog Tokyo on the road with me, and he is fantastic because he makes me get out and go for a walk in the morning and the evening, particularly when I'm staying away from home. And I found, so last year I was on the road quite a lot, by a lot, maybe 6 days a week. And I was not home a lot as well. I was staying in hotels quite a lot, and what started to happen was I was giving so much to other people and I wasn't giving back to myself with that. Um, so it'd get to the end of the week and I'd get home and I'd sort of like fall in a heap on the sofa. And so there wasn't a lot of self-care going on there. And I listened to something a little while ago that talked about every time you give something to someone, you need to give back to yourself. So currently, what I'm looking at doing is embodying a bit more compassion to myself. So that might mean, in order to do this day out on yards really well, I need to get up and I need to go for an hour's walk where I'm not glued to my phone and I can, focus on my breathing and I can, you know, kind of really enjoy spending time with my dog and my husband who will come with me. Or if I am out on the road without my dog, maybe I'll do some yoga. Or if I'm out and about and I'm stopping for some food, what can I give to myself that's nourishing so that I can show up better, but also so I'm not taking out of my cup. So when it's my turn to enjoy a day off, I'm not falling on a heap being, useless to everyone around me, or not useless to everyone around me, but not being able to do the things that light my world on fire as well. I adore my job and I adore helping people, but also there's a lot more life to live with that as well. And I think that's an interesting thing when we're looking at our horse and human relationships, because obviously everyone that we come across, they really care about their horses. But then I also see things can be magnified out of perspective because there aren't other interests in their life to help them to add a layer of perspective onto their horses too. And I know that for me comes with the privilege of the fact that I currently don't have a horse, save for my little thoroughbred who's currently living with my mum. Um, where I don't currently have that horse that I'm sort of thinking about all of the time, or thinking about what's the next good choice that I can make for that horse. But it is interesting for me, the most balanced people that I meet when I'm out and about have interests outside of horses and are also very good at giving to themselves so that they can show up better for their horse as well. I don't think I've answered your question, Beccy, in all honesty. I think I've done the most incredible side quest. Um, but hopefully that gives a bit of an insight as to what I'm about. I'm a deeply philosophical being, sometimes to my own frustration and definitely to other people's frustrations, but I'm here for it. So that's what I have to offer right now.
But it's like you've just said, it brings this layer to your sessions with your horses, the fact that you are philosophical, you are a bit of a poet with words, you are a writer, you are a contemplator, you do a lot of self-inquiry. I know from conversations with you that you've done, I know it sounds really cliche, but you've done a lot of work on yourself. You've really committed to putting yourself first, and I think you have really good boundaries, and I think it's inspirational to watch your work. And yeah, it's yeah. So what kind of things, what's like the typical, it's hard to say a typical or an average sort of challenge that a horse and an owner might have, but what are the sort of things that you come across most often in your work as an equine physio?
Oh, well, there's many layers to that. I think
I don't small questions, do
probably
I? They're just turning big questions.
I think probably the biggest thing that I find is people outsource responsibility to other people all of the time.
Yeah.
So this is even down to that basic level where people show up for a lesson with their trainer and their trainer chooses what to do.
Yeah.
So immediately, like again, I was at a clinic at the weekend with Nashon Cook, who's just like a wizard, my goodness. And he would ask people, so what do you want to work on? And they'd go, I don't know. And I think, oh, I appreciate you're in front of a really cool person who has a hell of a toolkit, but surely there's something that you want to work on. And even then, in voicing that, maybe you don't actually work on that thing, but the session can be steered in a direction that can help you towards the thing that you want to work on. So with that, I meet a lot of people who, maybe they train with someone who gets them to do things that they feel deeply uncomfortable doing, but they are in front of a person in a position of power, and they feel like what they've been asked to do is wrong. They perhaps don't have the confidence to say, oh, I don't want to do this with my horse, or I think my horse is done now, or I'm not okay with the way in which you've just taught me how to do this thing. Can we do something different? So that, on a very broad level, is something that I come across on the daily. And this is where I started to get quite frustrated. So throughout my career, the two things that I have been very frustrated with are exercise programming, because in my opinion, there are people doing things with their horses that they have no business doing with their horses. And actually, when you kind of scrape back a few layers, I think that on a level those people know, and they just could have done with being empowered into knowing that it's okay to take a step back, or it's okay to be doing a little less or a little differently with their horse. And the other thing I found frustrating is I meet a lot of horses who are compromised in ways which are indicated by their posture. And I started to get really quite frustrated with, like, oh, their posture is indicating this. Like, could you not see? And so with that in mind, I figured that rather than just get cross and upset and frustrated, I'd try to put together a little bit of an offering for that. So I've developed the fundamentals of horse posture, which is actually due like a little bit of a redesign, but the people who have access to it currently will have access to it when it's redesigned as well. And then my sort of ongoing, I guess it will probably end up being my life's work, which I'll probably rename at some point, is the fundamentals of exercise programming.
Awesome.
Because I meet a lot of people who have been given 1,000,001 exercises, 1,000,001 ways to drag their horse over poles, or wang up and down hills, or canter for spinal flexion, or but there's so much more around movement with your horse, and there's so much more around selecting what to do with your horse. So I wanted to build something where I could put power back to the people so that they can choose, and they can feel real conviction with what they choose to do with their horse, or they can understand how far back or how far forward they need to go to meet their horse where their horse is currently at. So it started off being like a little bit of a kind of theory project. And now we're in the train your eye stages. So I've got the theory stuff there, and now I'm looking at helping people to train their eye so that they can meet their horse out in the arena or in the field or whatever, and start to decipher what it is that their horse is telling them. And then eventually there will be exercises and things and collaborations with other professionals so that they can start to pick and choose for their horses. So circling back to the question that you started with, biggest problem that I find is that people aren't meeting their horse where they're at, and also they're outsourcing their power to other people, which means that down the line they feel a lot of guilt and shame for not standing up for their horse, even though they were hoping that someone kind of had their back. I think that's kind of
destructive.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's probably the most powerful thing that a person could do, is to hand back power through education, and ultimately do ourselves out of a job.
Yeah.
Which I wrote a post a couple of days ago on that, and I don't know where it came from. It sort of spewed out of me in the middle of a post, and And I just kind of went, oh, and it just came out and I wrote it. And I was speaking to that, and it's a really deep feeling within me that my ultimate goal in life is to never be needed, is to never go out and trade somebody else. That, you know, everybody has the knowledge to do it themselves, or, you know, well, ultimately, let's face it, ultimately, I don't even want horses to be trimmed. They would live in an environment that supported their needs, that meant that they could take care of themselves. I mean, that's like the ultimate goal, is that we don't need to intervene, which, let's face it, probably won't happen then. They'll probably just be living wild, doing their own thing. But yeah, it's a strange notion for a business to have, isn't it? To be educating people to feel self-empowered, to live with more autonomy, and to make informed decisions for themselves, that they no longer need you. And it's an unusual business model. And it's kind of where I think humanity is evolving towards, where we truly embrace the notion of collaboration beyond the sort of surface level, which is still brilliant, surface level collaboration, where we've got individual businesses that recognize how one individual or organization aligns with their ethos and can support mutual customers, kind of what we have, you know. But actually, beyond that, where we're actually thinking not just about the pennies in the bank in my business, and thank you very much, Yasmin, for referring that person to me. That's great. We both benefit from that. But actually thinking one step ahead all the while of giving back to the community, that real bigger vision of true synergy and synarchy, where we truly recognize that to be in competition, there's somebody has to lose. You have to take something from someone else in order to be better than another. And, you know, we're all at different stages of our own personal evolution and growth. And you sort of see like traditional competition behaviors between individuals and organizations and how they conduct themselves in business. And then you see, like, you know, this whole scale of individuals that have got this bigger vision going, that it's kind of difficult to work and live like that. But I wouldn't want it any other way. And for me, that kind of comes back into that whole thing about compassionate equestrianism. It's about, you know, the other, thinking of the other. There's me, there's the other, and then there's this bit in the middle. How do we feel about that? You know, how I meet the needs of the other whilst not detracting from my well-being. Because if, let's go really woo-woo and spiritual, if we are all one and we are all connected, which I truly believe we are, then if I hurt another by withdrawing anything, and I'm not talking about withdrawing something because of a boundary being stepped over, but, you know, I don't know, inserting myself to take a customer from somebody because I felt a lack of resources for myself. That's me being in competition really with myself, but it's that competitive vibe with another. If I recognize that, that's detracting from everybody, including myself. And it's like, how do we move towards that while we're all at different stages? You know, how do we not just inspire the individual, but how do we inspire professionals coming forward that might look at Yasmin Stuart Equine Physio and go, wow, I really want to embrace what Yasmin does, and I really want to learn that. You know, what's your words of wisdom for somebody up and coming in the industry who feels inspired to go out and help horses? What would you advise them?
I think that's a really good one. There are a lot of body workers out there now in lots of ways, and I don't use the word body worker in a derogatory way. I know that some people feel that that's a really derogatory word, but I'm using it in the plainest sense that there are a lot of people who use manual therapy techniques to work on horses' bodies. And I think that's really cool. With that in mind, there are a lot of people who work on horses' bodies in many different ways with many different mindsets and many different filters or lenses that they observe the horse's body through. And I think that's really cool. And that also means that there are people who are going to be looking at horses in a way in which is different to you. And that means that you're not going to pick up on everything, because you can't possibly, because there are people with different vogues and there are people with different thoughts, feelings, opinions, and backgrounds. Like my background, my first horsey job was in at a yard that practiced classical dressage, not a particular school. But they worked off of classical principles as taught to them by various different classical instructors. And so that means that my lens is founded upon that. Whereas there are some people who have a different lens. There are some people that decided to come into bodywork because they worked in the racing industry, and or there are people that came to bodywork because a bodyworker really helped the horse in some way, shape, or form. And I know, when I wouldn't like to say that I have a name in the industry at all, but I know when I started to gain more followers and then also gained awareness of other body workers with followings as well, people would say, oh, I had so and so out to my horse and they noticed this in my horse, and what do you think of this? And I'm looking at their horse like, that's not the lens I'm looking at things with. But I don't want to get this question wrong, even though there is no right answer. So I think for me, the biggest teaching that I had is, this is what I have to offer, and being really okay with, this is what I have to offer. And I know that I've had many a difficult discussion where I have explained to someone, I'm looking at this through the lens of an equine physiotherapist of this horse on this day. This is the information that I have, and these are the conclusions that I'm drawing with this. So with that in mind, I think it is, the words of wisdom would be always thinking this is what I have to offer, whilst also being open to what you might learn along the way, whether that is through secondary courses or whether that is through, the primary qualification you do. So I've got a diploma in equine physiotherapy and rehabilitation. However, I look at what I learned through my diploma, and I look at what I practice now, and my goodness, there's approximately 1 million miles between the two. However, that diploma got me to where I am today because it opened doorways to other progression. So you might meet people in the industry where you think, oh, that's really cool, I want to do what they do. But you're not going to be able to do what they do because they have an entirely different life, and they've had an entirely different set of circumstances that have got them to this point than you're going to have. But that's really cool, because that's kind of like a superpower, isn't it? Where, none of us are the same. We are all deeply individual, and we all have our own learnings and our own teachings that we're bringing to the table. And that means that we are all going to have our hot take and our unique spin. And also, we're all going to be able to help horses in many different ways. And also, that means that you can take your little nugget of inspiration and you can run with it in any direction, because that will open many doors. Like, I think about all of the different things that I have had the privilege of being able to do, partly for, my younger days being a bit gobby on social media. Now I'm trying to tone it back a bit, because honestly, the anxiety about what the comments say are real, even if I try not to look at the comments too hard. But I look at that and I think, God, that has got me an awful lot, and I'm so grateful for what I have to offer right now. And I also know that in a year's time, I'm going to be really grateful for what I have to offer, even though I know that my offering will change in that time. So it's kind of like, try not to worry about where you're going to get to. Try not to worry about where you're going. Just kind of show up each day and also try not to be presumptuous every time you show up, because I know that one's bitten me on the bum a couple of times as well.
Me too.
Yeah, I think that's it.
So how do we summarize that then? So it's useful to have a qualification in something that you're passionate about. Don't assume that, and correct if I got it wrong, don't assume that when you see a professional working like yourself, that following that route is going to give you that skill set, because you are the sum of your own personal development, your experiences, and the courses cherry picked for yourself and what you've made of them. So who you are now isn't who you were 5 years ago, and how you work and what results you might get.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And just enjoy it. Just enjoy the journey and talk to as many different people as you can. Like, I love it when people come up to me and they're like, oh, you know, I'm doing this and I've noticed this, and oh, you did that post at the weekend and that really resonated with me. I'm like, oh, cool. I'm not alone. That feels really nice. It's not, oh, I recognize you off of social media. It's like, there are more people on this journey and suddenly I don't feel quite so alone.
It's kind of why I wanted to start this whole conversation thing, just to have a place for people to hang out and just be geeky and nerdy, and you know, we're kind of sitting on the edge of, can we just be nice? Can we just be nice to each other and have differences of opinion and have different methods that we like, but you know, with this underlying theme of being compassionate equestrians. And yeah, can I share a little book that people might find interesting? I don't know if you've read it before. It's actually a book called Compassionate Equestrian. Did you know that existed?
No, I did not. I might have to have a read of that.
Yeah, it's actually.
That should have been the pre-reading. It's like pre-reading before. I think your ring light is in the way, my love. I don't have the mod cons like that.
It's a book written by a vet and a horse trainer, and how they've seen the horse from their respective professions, and they've come together to write 25 principles to live by when caring for and working with horses. And I think these principles have actually come from the Dalai Lama. So it's a kind of like a spiritual journey, where they have applied these principles to our industry. And it's a lovely, lovely, lovely book. I'm going to read out, the 14th Dalai Lama. What he says compassion is. And he says it's often misunderstood. Genuine compassion is based not on our own projections and expectations, but rather on the rights of the other. So if we apply that to horses or people, irrespective of whether another person is a close friend or an enemy, as long as that person wishes for peace and happiness and wishes to overcome suffering, then on that basis we develop a genuine concern for his or her problems. This is genuine compassion. And I think that's really beautiful. I think it's like, you know, whether they're a friend, whether they're an enemy, whether that other sentient being, irrespective of that, it's about recognizing within them the need to overcome suffering and one's own need to overcome suffering. And as we kind of touched on in this conversation, it always comes with ourselves. And actually, there is a chapter in here. One of the principles is about self-compassion, and how, in fact, it's right at the beginning, because it's how one, you know, might take care of oneself. So just to give you an idea of, I don't know, one of the principles might be, oh, here we are. And I think this is quite interesting. This is a mission statement of the Compassionate Equestrian. I'm going to read it out. So before you begin your journey as a compassionate equestrian, they want to explain some basic understandings that comprise the foundation of compassionate equitation. So they're they're speaking specifically of how we would interact with the horse. So the mission statement is: compassion becomes the foundation of all decisions that an equestrian makes with regard to his or her horse and all people involved in the equine community. I love that. As well as the global community. So they're kind of bringing everybody into this conversation, you know, through choosing compassion as a common ground for all decisions. Equestrians can together become a movement for creating a kinder, happier, healthier, more compassionate world. So I love that. I love that it's like, you know, through living our best life with compassion for ourselves, with compassion for the other, whether that's a person, whether that's, I'm going to call them somebody in your specific industry who's doing something that you might not do, but have compassion for them and their personal journey and where they're at in all of this. And then by demonstrating that, everybody benefits, because by you showing up, I hear a lot you say the words how you show up for that situation, for that horse, for that owner. You know, how you show up, which is how you are and how you're being in relationship to self first and foremost, you know, has a powerful ripple effect to everything and everybody around you, whether or not you are aware of it or not. So just by being, even if you just sit in your car, just by sitting in your car and being in alignment with yourself, you know, it ripples through the universe and it has this magic effect, you know. But imagine kind of embodying that and walking into a situation, being completely present, how much more you can achieve for compassion with that situation. So I guess you probably have this a lot as well, when you show up to a situation where an owner's wanting help, they're not quite sure what to do, they've had conflicting advice from other professionals, and you know, and then they're asking direct questions, should I be doing this? Or you're sort of directing information back to them as to what might be the right decisions to make. And again, it's all about empowering the owner to come to their own decision and to own that. But that takes some time and some discourse. But when you've got, I'm going to speak to my industry. If you've got another hoof care professional who has a completely different approach to you, where you're sort of looking at the whole horse going, it's not what I would do. I would make a different decision for these reasons. And they're in relationship with that other person who they cherish, and they might have known them for 10 or 15, 20 years, and they really like them, and they're a friend and they're a family friend. And it's that, for me, is one of the hardest situations that I'm faced with personally and professionally, as to how to support the horse and have compassion for the whole situation. So that's who's involved. And I find that really difficult. And I just think, be honest, be kind, and have care for the feelings of others. Because well, just because there doesn't even need to be a because. There's just no other way to live for me personally. It's like, you know, bring more heart into every situation, and don't be afraid to be bold and to be brave. Because I think as a woman, it can be more tricky for me anyway. I can't speak for all women, but for myself, I find it can sometimes be difficult to speak up and offer a different opinion.
I also think as well, with respect to that conversation, there's kind of a narrative here where, you know, we're making the assumption that we are correct in our own observations.
Absolutely.
And so there is the thing that I'm trying to get to or make right in my head is who is right. And I ultimately don't think anyone is. It's probably one of my biggest rabbit holes or watering holes of the year, where I'm looking at things. You know, I was having an amazing conversation with a lady at the weekend, where we were watching Nashon working, and she said, oh, what do you think? And I said, this is really interesting, because he's making observations and I'm making observations, and sometimes those observations line up and sometimes they don't. And the fun thing here is me going, oh, which one of us would do it better? And I said to her, not from a place of ego. This isn't, oh, I want to be right. This is like, oh, there are a million tiny observations that you can make in any given situation. And what if everyone is right in some way, shape, or form? What if everyone, we've all confirmed our own biases in some way? And so what if actually what that other professional has to offer for their bias really works for them,
Yeah.
and for their team around them really works for them? And I know I will go into situations where I think, actually, what they've got going on for them right now, whilst it's not how I would do it, it's really working for them.
Yeah.
Or actually, if the people that I sort of ensconce myself with, as it were, that my team, where we're all sort of, we've all got this rolling rapport with each other. If we support this person, it's not going to work out because we're just on like a totally different wavelength. And so whilst, yes, I look at things and think there is no way on this green earth that you would catch me doing that with that horse, um I do think, I think it's just kind of showing up in a way in which you can sleep at night, whilst also showing up in a way in which doesn't make other people not be able to sleep at night, that there's sort of little flux in
Yeah.
between. And it kind of comes back to, this is what I have to offer. And if you want this, then great. And if you don't, great. And I say to everyone, I'll support you in however I can. And then sometimes I have to put a boundary in and say, I'm really sorry. I don't think I have anything to give you right now. Um,
Yeah.
and they can either go, oh yeah, no, you do, or they can go, thank you, I appreciate your honesty there, and then they go about their merry day.
No,
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. There's so much more we've yet to know. There's so much more
Mm-hmm.
we've yet to understand. And I used to be really arrogant as a hoof care professional, and I thought I had all the answers. And then there was something that within me must have known on a level. It was like I just soured. Like I wasn't thriving in my health. I wasn't thriving in my business. And there was a part of me rebelled, but I didn't know it at the time. And it took me 10 years to kind of go, there's a whole big world out there of different ways of doing things. And there's other
Yeah.
ways a lot better than what I was doing, And then I've kind of been on this 5-year accelerated learning and understanding. But yeah, it's like you say, it's like, this is what I have. This is what I think I might be able to add to this cooking pot. But I'm not arrogant and ignorant enough to know that other person, can't make it do an even better job. But it's I think the difficulty for me sometimes is expressing
Yeah.
a different opinion.
Yeah.
Because I want the person to not. For me, one of the most uncomfortable things that I can feel is when somebody wants me to make all the decisions, and I'm like, well,
Mm-hmm.
I can't be responsible for your horse's well-being. I can offer this, but I can't make any promises. But this is what I got, and that's the honesty part.
Yeah.
It's like, be honest with what you think you might be, and be honest about what you don't yet know could happen if you don't offer that, and they continue on this path. Because, yeah, there's so much I've learned in the last, gosh, has it only been a year and a bit? Yeah, it's only been a year and a bit since I met you, I think.
So I
January.
have a story. I have a story that speaks to that. So in the never ending self inquiry, I am that person that will have therapy just to find out a bit more about themselves. And also with regard to that, probably, you know, self-engineer 47 mental breakdowns in the process. But I remember I was doing talking therapy with a lady. She was brilliant. And I remember talking about all of the ways in which I was overthinking something. And overthinking it with regard to not wanting to be truthful with the person that I was in a relationship with. And by truthful, I mean not telling them exactly how I felt in a moment, because I was scared of upsetting them, and then I was scared of the ramifications that that would have on them. And I went off on this big long dialogue, as you've probably noticed that I'm quite good at doing. And she was like, can I just stop you and say, who made you the queen of fucking everything? And I was a bit like, oh, thank you for that. So I think with regard to that, you know, we can all get caught up in our own head because, I mean, let's be honest, we all live in our own heads 98% of the time. Um, but actually, you know, we are just, like I say quite regularly, I'm just some guy. I'm just some person. And, you know, on social media, I have kind of found myself into this way where I have a little bit of a following. Not, you know, there are some big guns out there. I am by no means competing with the big guns. But then I think that tricks us into thinking that we're in um, some kind of position of leverage. And, you know, really, I'm just some person that happened to be cocky enough about their opinions that they put it online. And now the crown is kind of heavy on my shoulders of, goodness me, when I put that online, that is out there for everyone to see. So now I'm trying to be a bit nicer about it. But what I'm kind of coming back to is, it's like, you know, we can all have our opinions and we would all do things differently. And then if you asked me, you know, next week what I did this week, would I do it differently? And I probably would. And so we're in that state of kind of never ending flux with regard to that. And I think we all need to be a bit better at not being in absolutes. Is my long soliloquy about that story about that time that a therapist shook me really hard.
That's so hilarious. Talk about creating a pivot point. It's like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Who made you, what is
Sorry
it?
about
Who
that.
made you the fucking queen of
Queen of
everything, was
fucking,
it?
yeah, yeah. She was brilliant. She had a proper London accent as well, which I would not ever do the injustice of trying to copy, but she was just incredible. And that sticks with me all the time whenever I overthink something, or whenever I am taking away thoughts and or the opportunity for other people to weigh in. I have her voice crop into my head and I think, oh, thank you, Tracy. I needed that one.
What's the best sort of therapy that you've ever done? Like, what was the one that created the biggest shift and change? Like, what was it? Or was it an individual? Was it a technique, or was it just a person you connected?
Oh, see, I think all of them have been brilliant, but they've all resonated with me for um for different reasons, really. Um so I wouldn't like to say there was one that was the best, because they've all taken me on a journey in some way, shape, or form. Yeah, I think something that resonated with me a lot was after Falcon, my last horse, was put down. I had therapy, I say preventatively. Um, I was really thinking about giving up, and I was thinking about giving up because um, really it was just all a bit too hard. I felt very frustrated about the fact that I had this horse that I absolutely adored, and I'd self-appointed myself in this position of, I'm an equine physiotherapist, I should be able to fix everything, and in that moment I couldn't. And I reflect back now and I have a million more tools in my toolkit that I could have applied, but obviously didn't have the opportunity to. Um, and and then I also saw that I'd done literally everything in my power for this horse, and it wasn't enough. and then to go on social media and see people doing awful things with their horses and thinking, you know, I tried everything I could with that horse and it wasn't good enough. And I'm seeing these people being awful to their horses and their horse is still alive, and that just doesn't seem fair. So with that, I I was just done. I was really bitter and really angry about it. And I remember walking into the memory of when he was put down, and what you had to do is essentially scale that memory between 0 and 10, 0 being absolutely no response, no emotional response at all, absolutely neutral, indifferent about the memory, 10 being very upsetting, sort of re-traumatizing. And then you walked into the memory, and my therapist cued me to think about something. What was the color? Where did you feel it in your body? Where did you? And really, the the undertone of the memory was shame. There was a lot of shame, and that shame didn't originate from having Falcon put down. It actually came. I just want to caveat all of this with the really big ick about talking about your own personal traumas on social media, because I just, that's not like how I like to get likes. Um, but it came down to a situation where I was assaulted, and I felt shame about the fact that I didn't defend myself, even though I was a really strong individual. I thought I was strong, trained in the gym 6 or 7 days a week, was fit, and in the moment, I didn't defend myself. And I ended up with whiplash off of the back of that incident. And I was an equine physiotherapist at the time, and I was like, I'm gonna give this 1,000,001 neck exercises to help my neck to feel better. And I remember my neck never felt the same again. And I was just really frustrated. Like, I'm an equine physiotherapist. I got into this through my own physiotherapy journey. Why on earth is my neck still sore? Everyone who's looked at it said it's fine, but it just doesn't feel right.
Mm.
And I was walking in and out of this memory, coming full circle back to Falcon. And each time we scaled the memory, it was getting less salient. And then I got I got to, I think, either like a 1 or a 2 out of 10. And I felt this hot sort of sensation in my neck. And that feeling in my neck went away. That feeling that I'd had for literally years completely went away. And I thought, oh, that's really cool. And at the time, it was when The Body Keeps the Score, thanks to Celeste, was kind of going around social media again. As much as I know that a lot of people hadn't I know that a lot of people hadn't stumbled across that book in that way, but that was the way in which I found it. And a lot of people were talking about it in that moment. And I remember for me, that was like, oh shit, yeah, the body really does keep the score. Um, so I think that would be my most salient therapeutic experience, but I found all of them to be pretty cool. I'm quite an intuitive person without making everyone feel icky when you say that. So I'm pretty good at going, oh,
Like
I
I
think
see
this
dead,
feels quite good. Huh?
like I see dead people intuitive, or
Yeah,
what
when people say, "Oh,
kind
I'm just so intuitive," and everyone sort of secretly retches, but I'm pretty good at going, "Oh, how does this resonate with me right now? Does this have something to offer me?" And usually it does. Maybe I've just conditioned myself to look for the learning experience in things, but that means by and large, I've happened across things as and when I need them. Um, so yeah, that's kind of my sum up of the therapeutic effect. But I think really, you know, if we are looking at therapy, it's got to be accessible and affordable. And I know, like, when I with respect to Tracy, who, you know, called me back down to earth by calling me out, you know, that was affordable therapy because I literally couldn't afford anything else. And the sessions were £25 for an hour, which in the therapeutic world is quite reasonable. I know that, you know, that comes from the privilege that I could afford it, but I made myself afford it because in that moment I felt I needed it. But yeah, I think there's a lot out there, and it's just finding what resonates with you, really. And also knowing that if something's not working for you, you do also have the right to not do it as well. And yeah, I'm by no means an expert. I just know that I've wobbled into situations that seem to have worked for me at the time.
Yeah. It's interesting what you said about the injury going years after it presumably was held in the body, almost, I guess, like the emotional or the body. You know, I don't want to speak to this. It's your body, and who knows what really goes on, but it's like bio reprogramming. It's like we find a way to survive in that moment, but that trauma can get held and until it's released later on. Do you think this happens with horses?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely do. I think it happens with animals as well. It's interesting. So I've had some really cool experiences with horses when I've been body working. Horses that, you know, have come from less optimal situations, or horses that are, let's just use the word traumatized, although I do think that's sort of bandied around a lot, you know, where they've had a particularly tricky upbringing or tricky past life or tricky experience. And I think it's really interesting how I've definitely been aware of when I've been body working a horse and they're having a response that doesn't feel like it's directed at me. It's almost like a past life regression. So I remember there's a beautiful spotty mare that I work with, and it was my first session with her, and I literally just had my hands on her ribs, and she was really kind of lashing out, but not at me and not at her human. And she had this sort of slightly glazed expression. And I remember thinking, God, this is like a past life regression. You know, like when you're thinking about a memory and your face kind of grimaces, and then you're like, oh, I actually did that in my physical body, not in like my mental headspace. And I remember thinking, God, this is really interesting. And then she was lashing out, and then it was almost like she came to the other side of that feeling and she licked and chewed, and then her ribs released, or the area that I was working on released. And I remember thinking, that's really cool. You know, there is no ethogram that we could put to this. Or you could put an ethogram to this from a very matter of fact, in this physical body kind of way. But it doesn't feel like that. It feels like this was a memory, or you know, you see it acted out with horses when they feel like a little bit of restraint on the head collar and they start running backwards at 1,000,000 miles an hour and they've gone from zero to hero just like that. And I think that is, you know, that's their circuitry bypassing the physical moment because they've remembered what it feels like to be in a traumatic experience, and they're re-experiencing that again. And I definitely, all the while we're talking about this sort of thing, I think, goodness, I do not have the qualifications to talk about this. But I do. And then also, okay, so if I put this into the most recent time that I've experienced this, so I remember talking with one therapist about the propensity to escape and how I think it's also in The Body Keeps a Score. I can't remember, but I know I definitely had the conversation where when you get yourself into a tricky situation, your propensity to escape details how well you are going to recover from that experience. And so my dog, he's just a complete lovable thing. And he's a bit funny looking. He's an American Akita. He's got pointy ears, a dark face, and a curly tail. And a lot of dogs find him to be a bit problematic to look at, or he gives off this kind of pheromone or something. And so I remember when he was going through adolescence, obviously he's giving off some kind of pheromone that a lot of dogs don't tend to appreciate. And so he got munched on quite a lot. And I'm diminishing the experience. I found it really distressing. And I do still find it distressing that other people with their dogs who aren't under control have ramifications for my dog, that I have done everything I can to, you know, give him an appropriate setup, because he's also, you know, the breed has got a, you know, a specific disposition that I've been trying to sort of counteract. And so every time he got munched, that would generate behaviors off the back of it. You know, he would have a week or two where he struggled when meeting other dogs, or he'd get a bit friendly, or, you know, I'd have to give him extra rewards for every time he checked in with me, and just be really kind of on top of that every time he checked in with me when a dog came past, because he started to get a little bit fear aggressive. And then I remember it was a few months ago, I was out and about, and my husband was looking after him, and they were approached by a dog that was off lead, very aggressively, hackles up, teeth bared, going to go for my dog. And the situation arose where Tokyo sort of backed out of his collar, so he slipped his collar and managed to defend himself, and nothing awful happened. Humans intervened, and the dog in question that set on my dog actually ended up running away. And what was really interesting in that dynamic was, because he got to actually defend himself rather than kind of humans sort of pulling him back, or him being munched but me not letting him munch another dog because I don't want him performing that behavior. And after that, I was expecting to have to reinforce all of the good behavior again, and put him in really good situations again, and do all of the things to sort of counter condition that. And actually, he didn't have a problem. And I was reflecting on that with regard to what that therapist told me about someone's propensity to escape. And I thought, that's really interesting, because he had the propensity to escape and also defend himself a little bit, and his behavior came off better because of it, and he recovered better because of it. And that's not to say, oh, I'm going to let him, you know, go at any dog who approaches us off lead, but it was a really interesting point. And then I think about that with regard to horses, and you think about those horses who learn to pull back off of the head collar, or learn to pull back off of the tie up, or the horses who experience pain, and maybe they experience pain in a ridden situation where they will buck someone off, and they learn to escape it by bucking a rider off. And obviously there's a behavioral underpinning there, but you think about how that becomes a bit more of a hardwired response, and I think that's really interesting. I think that's a really fascinating phenomenon that I don't think we think about enough, really.
Gosh.
And again, I've talked at you for another 10 minutes, but there we go.
I could just chat and chat and chat, but I don't want to ask any more questions and get into any more conversations. So that's if there's any comments from anybody. So shall I just read out, loving the conversation. Somebody asks, do you think there is a difference? This is Sarah Williamson. Do you think there is a difference between compassion and kindness?
Well, it's interesting, because I actually think you answered this with reading what compassion meant in the Compassionate Equestrian book. So I think I'm going to defer that back to you in that you got there, but that's a great question, Sarah.
It is a great one. I mean, kindness is a part of compassion for me, but you can be kind. I think you can be kind to somebody without truly resonating with their situation.
Mm-hmm.
I think that compassion is a little beyond being kind. For me, it's being able to perhaps connect with that person, maybe on a deeper level. I mean, it's a funny thing. It goes right back to the beginning where I was saying it's a subjective thing, isn't it? I mean, what is kindness? You can only read out 20 definitions of what compassion is and what kindness is and have a different answer. So I think there probably is a difference, but it doesn't really matter, because to be kind is compassionate, and compassionate requires kindness. So I guess they're different but the same for me. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone
Yeah,
have
I also
here? Does anyone have any questions? They want to leave them in the box, or if we just completely stole the show.
I think I've just waffled everyone into tears.
Oh, do you know what? I've absolutely loved this. I think there were some questions I kind of had that I kind of posed to you before we met. I just want to check that we've actually sort of covered all of these. You've given some good practical advice about how somebody might evolve their own career if they like what they see. How does somebody learn about you and your services and your offerings?
I
Where do they
guess
go to
the
find that?
natural thing I was going to say, I think the natural thing would be to refer either to my social medias, all of which are Yasmin Stuart Equine Physio. So that's on Facebook and also on Instagram, or my website, which is www.yasminstuartequinephysio.com. And through there, you can find the courses that I offer, the webinars that I offer. You can book an online consultation, or if you're based in the UK, you can book an in-person consultation. And yeah, I'll be happy to help anyone in as far as I can offer help and guidance.
And I noticed on your website you've got some webinars coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to have a
So I've
little
got
chat about?
one this Friday. Yeah, one this Friday. So all webinars are recorded, so you can, if you can't watch live, you can watch the recording. And at the minute, the current theme is train your eye. So it's just it's giving people some tools to help them to observe their horse and understand what information they can glean either from their horse's body or their behavior or their face. So this Friday, I have got one on assessing the horse's neck. So this is going to go through looking at different brace patterns in the horse's neck, how to identify the sort of the muscular brace and what that means for your horse in a ridden situation or just in a generalized health situation. And then about assessing the range of motion in the neck so that people can just have a little go at assessing their own horse's neck range of motion, and then determining what that means for them, just as a way of, in the very least, if it helps people to understand why their horses are the way they are, that's a good starting point. And then you are being a guest webinar host on my platform, where we will be looking at I guess, well, we need to actually think of a title for this, a punchy title, but
Yes.
when I've been working with you, you are the first person that I've ever worked with from a hoof balance perspective who has said, I don't think these feet are the feet that can support a ridden horse in this moment in time. So I also know for a lot of people that has been quite a shocking thing to come to the realization of, or a shocking thing to be told. And so I thought that would be an interesting thing for everyone to learn and ruminate on. So that's what you're doing for me on the 7th of July, which currently isn't on the website to sign up. But there will be a bulletin when that does go on the website. It usually goes up about 2 weeks before it's live, just to give me time to advertise that. And then I've got other offerings coming up as well. So I've got Olivia Turner, who is an animal behavior consultant and a bridle and bit fit specialist. She's done a webinar for me already on what is your horse trying to tell you, where we're deciphering behavior and body language. She's also going to do a bridle and bit fit, and I've got many more in the pipeline.
Wow.
All of these webinars are added to the fundamentals of exercise programming. So if you're a member of that course, if you've signed up for that course, you get them you get them included in the course fees, but also they are available as a sort of pay-per-view, so you can just sign up to the webinar that resonates with you as well, because I also know there are a lot of courses out there now, and some might say the market is a bit flooded, and so I'm just wanting to offer things that are maybe a little bit more affordable and a bit more manageable as well.
I think that's really generous. And I think, yeah, I'm just loving it. I'm loving it. And I'm loving that we're in the UK, because there's lots of things that kind of go on in America and abroad. It's like, hey, we've got some amazing people in the UK. Let's celebrate that as well. Yeah, celebrate everybody, you know, just one well.
Yeah, and trying to shine a light on the cool people. You know, I've been doing this for over 8 years now, and I have some really cool people in my life who have supported me in my professional development in ways that I can't even begin to put words to. So if I can also give back to them by giving them a platform so that they can reach more people, so that we can cover a bit more of it. You know, when I first became an equine physiotherapist, I thought, or when I first qualified, I thought, oh, all you need to do is just sort of drag your horse over poles and do your carrot stretches and they'll be all right. And it really is not like that. So if I can shine a light on as many different aspects of horsemanship as possible, then that feels like offering good value, really.
And it sounds like collaboration, synergy, and compassionate equestrianism.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's awesome. Yasmin Stuart, you have been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me. What an honour.
I thank you for everything that you do for all the horses in the UK and abroad, because these things go global as well. And I just want to thank you for being you and for being the first of our guests on Conversations with Compassionate Equestrians. So thank you very, very, very much. And thank everybody for joining us. And this recording will be available free forever. You cannot escape it ever again. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Yasmin. Have a good evening. There will be another conversation with Compassionate Equestrians coming up in July. Date and guest to be confirmed. So just watch out for that. Thank you, everybody. Yasmin,
thanks,
I love
everyone.
you. You're amazing. Big kisses to your dog from me and his amazing achievements. I love you.
All right.
Thank
bye,
you,
my love. Have a great evening. Bye.
Bye-bye.